And it's 5:05 on a Friday. You know what that means? It's time for the preacher's kid and the pastor. Opinions expressed are those of the show's guests and not the opinions of the staff and management of WSTU, Port St. Lucie Broadcasters. Any recordings without written permission of WSTU is strictly prohibited. And now let me introduce the hosts of your show, Pastor Dino and Trayvon this morning.
Well, thank you, Ray. It's great to be on. Great to be on again. Good to see you, my friend. And this is a very interesting topic we have today, I think. It's a topic that everybody understands and has been connected with, and it's the idea of loneliness.
Yeah, kind of interesting. And we have a special guest on. Rob Drellick has joined us, and Rob has actually been on the program with us before. So we're just delighted that he's had the opportunity to join us again today. So Rob, welcome. We're going to pick your brain today.
Thank you. Glad to
or
be
maybe
here.
hopefully we're not setting you up or anything, but just pick your brain. And I know Dino's got a great deal of information also, but I'm sure I'll have some questions.
Sure, fire away.
Okay, great. So Dino, did you want to?
Well, I was thinking about loneliness, and I want to say this to Rob this morning. I think some loneliness is normal, don't you think? I think when people get lonely, I remember one time I was heading off in Miami to a very important function, a political function. And I walked in this big, huge room. There's people everywhere, and I was sure I was in the right room. I did not know a soul. And I walked around. I told a couple people who I was, and they just kind of looked at me and went on their way. And I realized finally I was in the wrong room. But there was a sense of loneliness that was not very normal at that moment.
Well,
in my
you
life.
probably want to differentiate between being alone, feeling alone, and really, loneliness.
Tell us about that. Tell us about that,
Well,
Rob.
I mean, being alone is simply you're just in a situation where you don't know that many people. You just, you're not connecting with someone. Loneliness is a much different situation. It's almost at some point to actually a clinical level, where people are really sometimes despondent and experiencing despair, that kind of thing. It can be pretty serious. It can be. Depends on how long it goes. And it can actually tumble into depression, which is a very serious
Now, Rob,
issue.
does that distress or discomfort, does that happen quickly with most people? Is it a period of time? How does that work with most people?
I don't know about most people, but I know in general, just depends on the situation. A loss of a loved one. It could be a loss of a pet, actually, where people are feeling lonely and just not connected to anything. That's where it gets serious, frankly, where there's no connection to the world at all.
Social contact's important.
Oh, it's absolutely
Relationships.
essential. It's absolutely essential.
Yeah. So my experience in that room was not that big a deal, you're saying.
I don't think you should run to the doctor or anything like that.
You weren't being dramatic, were you?
I just wanted to get out, frankly.
Rob, I was thinking about like social anxiety or separation anxiety. A lot of times, like we'll have a grandchild maybe visit for a week or so, and I notice when they go home, my wife sometimes will have a little bit of separation anxiety. Would that be kind of a form of loneliness, or is that a totally separate?
I think it's a different domain. Actually,
Is it okay? Okay, I wondered
probably.
about that.
I have to qualify what I'm saying. I practiced psychology a dozen years ago, and I'm really not up on things. And I was working more with children and adults. A lot of things are kind of, they overlap, but still, I don't want to come across as a resident clinical expert here. But have experienced a lot though, and I did have to read up on things. Preparing for this a little bit.
Right.
Actually, if you don't mind me saying, one thing that was just startling was the frequency of people with experiencing loneliness. It's a epidemic level in the United States. I was shocked that it's that high, and also worldwide, like the Department of Mental Health and World Health Organizations and departments, psych organizations, they've done a lot of research on this, and it's at extremely high levels. Like it varies. The study I was I was looking at varied from 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 5 people.
In
you
your
know?
kind of in your estimation, Dino and I talked about this a week or so ago. As you look at social media, what effect? And again, I know not to put you on the spot and total statistics or anything, but and from my view, I would think that social media has contributed to that with
Oh,
kids and all of us really.
It's the number one. It's a
Is it
leading
okay? Yeah.
factor.
Oh, that's it.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's.
Mhm.
I'm glad we're talking about this topic then.
But
Yeah.
what's counterintuitive is they find that with older people over 60, it's actually less than teens, believe it or
Mm.
not. That doesn't seem to
Mm.
make sense, does it?
No, but
You know.
but the social media thing does
Mhm.
again gives you information like because it seems like so many younger people spend so much time on an iPad,
Oh.
not to attack the Apple Corporation
Mhm.
or their phone, and they've really kind of checked out from society in a lot of ways.
They do live in that world, a lot of kids. Now, a lot of kids do play games which do connect,
yes,
you know.
yes, that's good.
but a lot of kids are in that world.
Yeah, I was telling my mother-in-law, I said, I was raised with a family of 8, and we would always, as soon as the doors were open, we'd be outside, playing football, basketball, baseball, doing something, hiking. And my mother used to, we grew up in the Midwest, like, as you know, Rob, more in a farm community. And we didn't have really a dinner bell, but a lot of people did. I mean, my mom had to call us in to get us to come in. And now you have to literally push your kids, or in our case, grandkids, out the door and say, you have a basketball hoop, you have a pool, you have, Johnny down the street, go do something, get off of your device and go physically do something. So our society's changed dramatically, I think.
Absolutely. It's the number one factor in the research I've been reading
Wow.
recently.
Wow.
I want to say to our listeners too, if you want to call in and share something on this topic, you maybe want to ask Rob or myself or Draven a question. It's 220-WSTU, 220-9788, and callers, we'd be glad to hear from you. Speaking about this whole thing of loneliness, and speaking, Rob, about the elderly, as a pastor, I've spent many hours with people that lost their spouse, and it really isn't a lone time for them. There's things have changed, and one of the things I've learned is that there's a new normal now. You've got to go into a new phase. How do you feel people can do that? What are some of the things that you think about that help them to get kind of a new normal in life? Is it getting out with other activities? Is it joining clubs? Is it?
Well, let me say this. In terms of when someone has lost, like a spouse,
Mhm.
I've experienced this, not personally, but with other people that have lost spouses, what you hear is, well, everyone at the funeral says, let me know if I can help you, and all this. And that goes on for a few days. And after that, they don't see anyone.
Mhm.
Now, if you're blessed to have a large family and they contact you, that's some. But if you don't have a family who's contacting you after the funeral, people are back in their routines and they're not contacting people. And I've talked to several people, told me just that.
Yeah.
In fact, I called someone. I said, let's get some dinner. And she says, you're the only one who called me.
Wow.
She says, everyone goes back to their jobs and their families, and everyone was very nice at the funeral, but I feel like I'm on my own now. And that was kind of revealing,
Yeah.
I want to tell you guys a great story. I just heard this story on this subject. Many of you know, last Friday, we had Rudy Holland on. Rudy got in late on his airplane. And he was flying out the next day. He was preaching in Melbourne. And then he was flying out on Sunday night. And of course, we had all those storms here. So he got out of here late and got into Atlanta around 2:00 in the morning. So what are you going to do at 2:00 in the morning? You have to wait till 7:00 the next plane goes, which he's flying to Virginia. And he was he's a wonderful man, a great friend of mine. He's a preacher. He loves the Lord, but he's kind of fussing with God and saying, God, just get me home, He gets on this next airplane and he starts talking with a fellow. Now, Rudy lost his wife in death just a few years ago. In fact, I did the funeral for her. And he's remarried and doing very well. But he sat down next to a man on the airplane, and they were talking, have a good conversation. And Rudy asked him, what do you do? He said, well, I kind of travel different places. I'm retired. I visit places. And then he kind of went blank for a while. And then he said, but my wife died. I do this all by myself. And so Rudy, because he had just been through this with his wife, kind of ministered to that guy right there. And I think that the point that you make, Rob, is so important. Those who have lost the loved ones, we need to keep an eye on them and do what we can as a church, even to be a blessing to those folks. That's a great point you're making, really.
You were asking about what can people do, and if they find themselves feeling lonely. Now, again, there's loneliness, and which is like one level of a problem, but then it can tumble into depression, which can be very serious and lead to health conditions. It's just amazing some of the health conditions that it could contribute to. But what people need to do is kind of have an understanding that they're having this issue and get motivated and get out and go for a walk and seek groups out and seek your family and ask people to go to dinner. Anything, join a gym, go to Pilates, go to the YMCA and exercise. You just have it. Really, activity is a thing. Get moving and develop other routines and other relationships, because that's just absolutely, important. There's another population too that I was reading about, actually, which you wouldn't think about. It's the people who are pretty much on their own, and they might be working 2 or 3 jobs, and they're just working, and they're not connected. I mean, they have their job, but they're doing their job. But after that, because of all the time they're putting in their job, they don't have any social time.
Ray.
No, I can see how it could happen. I can see how it would happen.
You were talking about how important it is for family to stay engaged with that person that's been affected. I think about my mother-in-law. She went through the death of 2 husbands, and how it affected her. And she made a comment, and she said, it's great having the kids. It's great having the grandkids. And it's great that you guys have taken an interest. And we do encourage her to stay engaged with her friends and family. But she said it's different with a spouse. When you lose a spouse, your kids, as much as you love them and grandkids, it's difficult to replace your spouse. And so I think that too is a form of loneliness. And really hit me is like, we can do a lot, but when you lose somebody that you've been with for 30, 40, 50 years, that's a deep loss.
Those are true words, Draven. I think all of us and my wife and I have been together 57 years, and I can't imagine living without her. And I've had people ask me if she dies when we remarry. I can't even think of that. I mean, I think about her. I'm not interested even talking about that. But I think all of us have wives here, and that would be Ray doesn't, but Ray, you're doing well, my friend. You're doing really good. We are blessed by you. We really are.
And let me add this. People sometimes don't contact someone who's lost a spouse, and I've heard people say, I don't know what to say. I just don't, and I can understand that, so that lessens the contact from friends,
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
So let's talk about that for a minute. What should we say when we go to somebody, they've lost a spouse? I don't know. Sometimes there's even any one thing to say. It's the fact that you're present with them,
being with them and listen, just doing a lot of listening.
Yeah. Listen. Yeah. It's great advice. Yeah. Great advice. Rob, let me ask you this. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude. I think I may be wrong on my number here. I think there was 10 specific places in Scripture where Jesus went away to be alone. Now, he wanted to get away from the disciples for one thing, and he wanted to get away from the crowds, but he wanted to get away, and he spent time then with his Father. What's your thinking about solitude, and how often should a person get away like that? I know in the mornings, for me personally, I enjoy going to my study. I have a study at the house. I enjoy being there. I enjoy the Scripture. There's something special about that morning, but there's times also when you just kind of need to get away. You've heard of people taking sabbaticals and they go away for a while. And I don't know, some may agree with that, some may disagree with that. But what do you think about the whole idea of solitude? And what do you think about that, Draven?
Yeah. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, well, simply, I think it's a wonderful thing to spend time, and being Christian, we spend time with their Scripture every morning, and as much time as we can. like a lot of people, you're reading the scripture and you're reflecting on it, and next thing I got to go to Home Depot, and you got this and that, and the real world kind of creeps in, and you have to have that discipline to stay there for whatever period of time you have allotted, and being retired, we're blessed to have that time. But when I was working and I had to be at work at 7:30 and I had to be on, there wasn't a lot of time for that. So I'm blessed to have that time now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's healthy.
Yeah.
I think it's very healthy.
I was thinking when you're saying that, I think people should try to find ways, if you do have, feelings of loneliness, is maybe try to convert that to a form of solitude, and maybe convert it to a prayer. And I've always felt, I think I shared with you, Dino, I don't have many times of loneliness because I always feel that God's with me. I've always have somebody to talk to. And of course, I'm not shy, as you guys know. So, I always felt that I have somebody with me at all times. So, but yeah, if you do have feelings of loneliness, and if you can talk to a friend or family member, do that. But if you can't, just always remember that God is with you. And it's okay to, reach out to him.
Yeah, you guys have been in the Wednesday night Bible studies that we've been doing on Exodus, and that was one of the biggest things through that whole 40 chapters. There was the understanding of the presence of God, and there's some who have written books on practicing the presence of God, recognizing he's with you, he never leaves you, he never forsakes you, and that helps us with the anxieties that we have in life sometimes. But yeah, I think I would say to our listeners today that solitude is a good thing. It really is. I don't think you ought to live in it all the time, but there's times when you just need to get away, times to reflect. The place I formerly lived, I would go away in the afternoon when I had a chance, and there were hot tubs in the area, these huge hot tubs, and I would get in that hot tub, and it was therapeutic for me to do that, and just go sit and relax, read a book, or do whatever I wanted to do, and you feel better with all of that, and
Sure.
I think workaholism is not a good thing. I think it wears you out after a while. Rob, with the young people today, children today, why is there so much of this problem with loneliness in their lives?
Well, again, what I was reading is that technology is a major contributing factor, to that.
Too much time on the cell phone and the.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, they're doing their own thing, and they're not in touch with their own families sometimes. That's an issue, as well as the elderly. The elderly. But there's other populations, and I've come in contact with people with significant hearing problems, and I've noted that they're by themselves, and there's a gentleman at the cafe when we have breakfast with the men's groups. There's a gentleman that he will not engage in any conversation, individually, but he won't go in groups. He can't hear what I'm saying half the time, and so he tends to isolate himself, just because of this. And he wears hearing aids, but he has a significant hearing loss. The gentleman in his 90s. Yeah. So a handicapping condition can contribute to that.
Yeah. I know some parents that they one of their goals is supper time. We eat together. And there's no cell phones. The cell phones are out in another room. And I've had a number of parents tell me that is a tremendous help to the entire family, talking about their day and not having their playing with the cell phone all the time.
But getting back to kids, a lot of kids these days, and it's always been a problem, and maybe it's worse these days, but kids don't feel like they fit in. They just feel isolated, and there's the whole bullying thing going on, and kids go to school and they just try to get through the day. It's kind of traumatic for some kids.
Yeah, I think for the parents out there and the grandparents, try to engage your children and or your grandchildren, and the more I think you can reach out to them, the better, because they may not say anything, but it's there. It exists, right? So it's best that we engage and try to be involved with them. I think Sandy and I, we love being around our grandkids, so we try to reach out to them on a consistent basis. So I think it's good to do that. Rob, when you think of loneliness, I think like an umbrella, does it fall under the umbrella of like anxiety, depression? Does it have its separate silo in your mind? kind of where does it fall? Is it a separate kind of thing,
Well,
entity?
When things get significant, and there are clinical indicators, criteria for depression, and when it goes on for a significant period of time, and it interferes with your basic life functions, and you don't want to interact with people, and just taking care of yourself, your own personal health, when those things are hampered because of this, now you're into the area of depression. And that's and now anxiety and depression are on the same continuum. Most people who have anxiety or depressed and vice versa.
Mhm.
That's the latest thing I've been hearing. And so they kind of, when they're seeing doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, they're being kind of treated for both. But what were you asking again?
The umbrellas, like,
Oh.
it sounds like it kind of is related, but maybe under separate, like, silo, I'll call it, like its own.
Well, I never heard of loneliness in the DSM. That's
Okay.
like the Bible for diagnosing mental illness. But
Okay.
I can't say I recall that. It's been a while.
Mhm.
But I think it could make itself, if you meet those certain criteria, into that,
Yeah.
where it gets very serious.
As you think back when your working day, so to speak, were there any books that stick out to you that were really, really good on loneliness and those types of things that you would say, boy, that was a book that I think would be a good read, or any sites that you come across that you think might be good for people to engage? And this would be good for you too. Do you know?
Nothing comes to mind, frankly. I think it's frankly all about personal interactions.
Okay.
And that's been around forever, ever since I started studying psych, years and years. It's all about personal interactions,
Engagement.
And schools are good for having groups for
Mhm.
kids, and there's all sorts of groups, just getting them in the group,
Good.
whether it be children's groups or adult groups. That's important. Book groups, there's a ton of them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I just brought a little booklet here with me, Traven. This was just given to
Mm.
me by a lady at my birthday the other day. It's called Promises from God for Every Man, and there's a section on dealing with anxiety.
Mm.
And there are various verses here. And I think sometimes we are not aware as Christians, maybe even, of the importance of a relationship with God and with the Lord. 1 Peter 5:7, for example, says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Psalm 37:5 says, commit everything you do to the Lord, trust him, and he will help you. And then in Psalm chapter 16 and verse 8, it says, I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand, I will not be shaken. Then one more in Deuteronomy 31:6, do not be afraid and do not panic before them, for the Lord your God will personally go ahead of you. He will never fail you nor abandon you. Those are great promises from God's word. And I do feel that whether or not a child accepts Christ or not, whether or not a teenager accepts Christ or an adult accepts Christ, I think we should always present the gospel to them and the understanding of the gospel. And these promises then become very much a part of our lives after a while. But it only comes with a relationship with Jesus Christ. I've told my wife many times one of the best times we have is when we just sit and talk pretty much about nothing. I mean, there's no real topic that we're going after. Sometimes she talks about what she wants. I talk about what I want. We're not even listening to each other, but we're there with each other,
Yeah.
And I think when there's death, and I think when there's children going through all this anxiety, I think a lot of love, a lot of care, a lot of hugs. I mean, there needs to be some love there that's really making a difference in their life.
You make a really good point on spreading the gospel, and sometimes we're hesitant to do that because we're like, I'm not sure they're listening, whether it be kids, grandkids, or even friends. But I think we should share the gospel, because if most people learn by repetition, at least I do, and just hearing it consistently, maybe from a number of voices, is a good thing.
It is a good thing.
You
It
know,
really
so-
is. Yeah.
You don't want to be overbearing with it, but it's okay to share it.
Time for a break, my friends.
Okay, thanks, Ray.
Wow.
Okay, we're going to take a break from the preacher's kid and the pastor and come back in 1 minute. But if you'd like to get in on the show, you can call us at 220-9788. That's 220-WSTU. And now we'll return you to the preacher's kid and the pastor, and Pastor Dino and Traven.
Thanks. Hey, Ray, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsors here, to John McDonald, CPA over in Palm City. I just dropped my taxes off for him to prepare. I'm a late bloomer, but left that for John to work on. He's terrific. He can be reached at 772-221-8882. Again, 772-221-8882. John and his team are great there. So if you're looking for an accountant, that's really terrific. He's the man. Also, I wanted to thank Peggy Wood here, the attorney. She does a great job for me and my clients, and she's with McCarthy Summers. And she can be reached at 772-286-1700. Again, 772-286-1700. Actually, I've asked her to come on and speak about wills and trusts, and I think if we can free her up to do so, it'll be great. So
that's going to be a great topic. That's a very important topic.
Great topic. Then also want to reach out to Debbie Hollister Insurance. Deb and her team are great at for health insurance and group hospitalization coverage. And Deb can be reached at 772-288-2389. Again, 772-288-2389. And also want to thank you, Dino, for being one of our sponsors. That's terrific.
My privilege.
And then what I'll do is towards the end of the show, we'll recognize some other folks, but I'm going to turn it over. I know we have a caller.
Yeah, we are so glad to have Kane Arfon with us today. We are talking about loneliness and dealing with loneliness in life. And Kane Arf, thank you so much for calling in. What is your question?
Well, I have a question for your guest. Given the magnitude or the significance of loneliness, I'm concerned about children with autism, significant autism, or they don't have interactions with other children, many of them, and many of them don't have interactions even with their family. And I'm wondering if Rob knows from his work with kids if autism could lead to another level of loneliness and another level of mental illness.
Absolutely. There's significant research that children and adults with autism have accompanying mental health issues, anxiety, depression, those kind of things.
I'm thinking primarily as it would relate to loneliness. Are they lonely?
I'm not really sure. I think it's like with autism, everything's a case by case basis. There are some general guidelines about autism, but the unique thing about autistic individuals is that they're very unique. You just can't put autistic individuals in a pigeonhole because they all have their strengths and weaknesses and their gifts and the things that they're weak in. There's a lot of work on one of the significant features of autism is it's a social anxiety disorder, or a social disorder. Let me back that up. It's a social language disorder. Many have anxiety issues. That's what I meant to say. So they have a hard time relating to people. And I know teachers in schools put a significant amount of time in working with those skills so they can interact with people. A lot of times their interactions are rather robotic, but that's the way it comes out. But they probably need to be in groups. And the real issue, I think, is after school a lot of times. And what I've seen, there are parents who get together, and I hate this word, but they have play days, where they get together because many can't drive. So the parents are getting them together and they take them places together. And then as young adults, it might even be more pronounced, so it's a very large issue.
Yeah. To the caller, I have a grandson who's a preteen. He deals with some autism, but to your question, he he suffers with what I shouldn't say suffer, but a lot of children with autism, they have a heightened sense of emotions. Let's say he hurts deeply, but he also feels deeply. He's just, it's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Like if he makes a mistake, he beats himself up. You don't have to. He does it himself.
Mhm.
But he also, if he has a joy or jubilation, it's at a heightened sense. So that it is a different thing that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Autism.
Again, every autistic child is unique, and that has to be evaluated and intervened or mitigated, accordingly.
Yeah,
Yes.
the reason for my question was just that it seems to me that from my limited experience with autism and autistic people, primarily children, if they don't have friendships, if they don't have interaction with other children, or in many cases with anybody, are they lonesome? And if they are, how deep could that lonesomeness become?
I think it's very possible they could have intense feeling of loneliness and no one loves me, and not being connected. But again, many of these children, and again adults, they they they're not connected, and they some feel despair, and they're not feeling connected to the world because of a lack of relations. Even though a lot of people are trying, sometimes it just doesn't.
Yeah, I understand that. But we don't know, am I correct? We don't know if they experience loneliness.
I'm just taking a subjective guess. I would think many would feel lonely,
Yes.
but again, I'm not looking at research.
Yeah,
And there are
got it.
people out there, frankly, who are right on top of this. They're reading the research every day, who are really experts in this area.
Sure.
That's a great question, Kenneth, and I really appreciate you calling in. Thank you so much for that call. That's
Okay,
excellent.
bye.
Thank you, sir. I want to mention a story in the Bible about loneliness. I was thinking of this coming over here tonight. In the Transfiguration, there are two people that appear, Moses and Elijah, and we call them heroes of the faith, great men of the faith. In the Old Testament, Elijah had just performed a miracle of God with the prophets of Baal. He's feeling really good about himself. Then a woman comes after him named Jezebel. And he goes into a deep state of depression. And and there's a lengthy story. I won't go into all the story here, but he goes to the Lord about it. And he says, Lord, I'm the only one. There's nobody else standing for you like I'm standing for you. And he meant that from his heart. He said, I've done all of this, and now you bring this woman in my life. And the Lord says to him, in essence, well, just so you know, Elijah, I happen to have 7,000 more prophets. If you drop out, I got 7,000 more. And I think it's a fascinating thing that sometimes we take so many burdens on ourselves that we can't deal with stuff. And the fact is, there are many people probably there to help and surround us. And I know with my family, I'm very thankful for my family. We have our squabbles like every family. I'm talking about the extended family as well as my intimate family. But boy, if you come against us, they're coming out like an army, And I think that's the kind of camaraderie. Rob, we have that at our church, don't we? Talk about the church a little bit.
I was just going to say, we have quite a few people who are single or have lost spouses, and I see that as a great forum for these people to get together, and we have meals, and a lot of it's around food, actually.
That's okay.
A lot of
That's good.
sugar, a lot of sugar in that.
Well, you made me think of they hosted a luncheon for folks that are separated for one reason or another for Valentine's
I
Day.
remember that.
Yeah, and that was really a great event, well attended. I think we had 25 or 30 people
Yeah, it was
there.
a good
That
group
was
there.
a really
Yeah.
good group. So
Yeah.
that was a really positive thing. to
I
bring
asked them if
people
I could
together.
come. I'm the pastor. They said, no, you're not invited. So they had a good time.
I know
that's
people
good
say
stuff.
it's the highlight of their week to come to
Yeah.
church and to have
Yeah.
the social interaction
Yeah.
and having a cup of coffee with other church members.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think and Rob, you mentioned at the break how important the church is, and you're absolutely right. There needs to be that fellowship. It's not a club. It's a church. It's the body of Christ. It's the believers
Mhm.
gathering together, and it's a very beautiful thing. I think Kennard's question is a very good question, by the way, because there's so many different. I think you answered it beautifully, Rob, because
Well.
it goes from person to person. But I often think of the story of Elijah.
Mhm.
You know, that he's a man of faith. He is one of the great men of the Bible, we say,
Mhm.
and yet he was so lonely and depressed. He was overwhelmed, and God kind of corrected him and said, "I got 7,000 more. It's not
Mhm.
just you."
I was thinking
But-
when you were talking about him, I was thinking about Daniel and the lion's den, and I'm like, he had to have moments of loneliness,
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
"God, help." So
I was
Yeah,
gonna
don't,
say
don't you
that,
don't you think he went into the den? He did say, "If God wants to deliver me, He'll deliver me." Don't you think he might have said, "I sure do hope you deliver me"?
I would think.
Go ahead, Rob. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was going to say, parents are very talking about the autistic children and Asperger children. I know a lot of parents are extremely depressed about, not depressed. They're very, that's not the right word. They're very concerned about their children,
Hmm.
who their kids aren't making connections.
Mm.
It's a
Boy, that's so
it's a
important.
common theme, and like I said, many of them get together and they do things with.
You know, when children go from school to school, they change. Maybe the parents get a great job somewhere, and the children go to the next city. Sometimes it's a long while before they connect in that community, and that's a tough thing. It really is
that
a tough
is
one.
tough.
Mhm.
And so I think parents, and I think you mentioned before, Robert, maybe you did, Traven, that grandparents need to really be a part of their lives if they can, if there are grandparents.
Yeah, and I like Rob pointed to this earlier. I think it's incumbent upon the parents to really help a child like that get involved and to be involved. And it takes a little extra work, but I commend my son and my daughter-in-law, especially because she's taken a pretty good approach on it. She takes the initiative to keep my grandson involved, and I commend her for that. So
Mhm.
I did have another question for you, Dino, though. I'm thinking about Christ. Like, there had to be moments of loneliness. As you think about that, maybe after the break you could speak to that, but there has to be moments throughout the Bible that he had loneliness. He really, even he had to have some moments of loneliness.
He really did. I want to speak to that right after our break. I'll be glad to do that, Traven, as well. It's a great question, by the way. Great question.
Yeah. So
Rob, do you see an increase generally in America in this topic, or is this getting better? Is it leveling off? Where are we at?
I personally cannot talk about that. I've just been looking at the research, preparing for this a little bit. I'm reading that it's a worldwide uh, epidemic,
Mhm.
and even before COVID, and now after COVID, they say it's even worse.
Wow.
So uh, maybe someone's done research on his feelings of being isolated and lonely, but I just haven't read that. But I know they are researching it, and it's a very significant problem.
Well, I've always said if there's one sermon I preach before I die, it'd be on hope, because
Mhm.
everybody needs hope. Hope is the future. Hope's looking ahead. And if we don't have hope, it is a very lonely life. It really is. And
Yep.
it begins with our relationship with Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
Time for another break, Traven.
yeah, absolutely.
And you're listening to The Preacher's Kid and the Pastor. We'll be back in 1 minute. If you'd like to join in the show, give us a call at 220-9788. That's 220-WSTU. And we return you now to the preacher's kid and the pastor, and Pastor Dino and Trayvon.
I'm going to take it here real quick and recognize the balance of our sponsors. But before I do that, just want to again just let all our people listening in today know a little bit about our church. We have Sunday morning service at 10 o'clock. We're at 3110 Southeast Astor Lane here in Stewart. We'd love to have you visit. I don't believe you would be disappointed. You'd meet some new friends. So come and see with us. Would be terrific to have you. Real quick, I want to reach out to one of our sponsors, Paul Piatti, Home Improvements. Paul's been doing it for over 40 years. He does a little bit of everything. So if you need somebody like that, he's your guy. He can be reached at 772-546-3403 or his cell number, 772-215-3762. Also, a good friend of ours at the church and also our sponsor is Two Anchors Plumbing, and that is Larry Grubb. He can be reached at 772-201-3516 or his partner, Tom McGinn, 772-210-2084. Also, another friend of ours at the church and also a great sponsor is Pools by Greg. Terry Wicks, been in the pool business for over 40 years building custom pools. If you need a pool built or you build or a pool worked on, updated, call Terry Wicks at Pools by Greg. He's 772-370-5025. Again, call Terry at 772-370-5025. And last but not least, I want to recognize Sandra, a good friend of ours at Sunny Coast Landscape, Sandra Barnett. She can be reached at 772-215-0940. Again, 772-215-0940. Again, these folks have been in the business for over 40 years. If you want to get landscaping done and have it done right, give Sandra a call. So we want to thank all of our sponsors again. They're terrific.
They really are, Trayvon. We are very, very thankful for our sponsors. The question you asked earlier, was there a time when Jesus was really lonely? And I think it's important when we think of Jesus, the Christian view of Christ through history has been he is truly God, he is truly man. And so as God, he is God, and he never gave up the right to be God, but he was the Son of Man. And when Jesus was heading to the cross, and we'll be celebrating that very shortly at our church, as Jesus is heading to the cross, we realize that he is in the garden and he is praying, and he says, Father, let this cup pass from me. And what that was, that he did that 3 times. He said that 3 times. And what he was saying was, I would like to really get out of this as the Son of Man. He realized the agony he was about to go through, the pain that he was about to face, the terrible beating of the cat o' nine tails, and the fact that he'd be crucified on a cross. But then he says, but I know, I know that I have to do this. And the thing that was breaking Jesus' heart really was the relationship with his Father. And every human being, to really have a complete life, needs a father, at least an image of a father somewhere in their life. And the Father, he would say on the cross, my God, why did you forsake me? And then before going to the cross, the other prayer he prayed was John 17, the high priestly prayer. And he said, Lord, help me to get through this, he said to his Father. And once I get through this, we'll be back in fellowship together in heaven. So I believe those were lonely hours of Jesus. And so, when the Bible says Jesus bears our burdens, he cares for our souls, he understands all of it because he's experienced it all. And that's the most important things. Rob mentioned about the importance of being in church, and that is so vitally important to be in church, to have that fellowship. But the thing about the church also is that wonderful relationship you can adopt with Jesus Christ. So the answer is yes. He was very lonely in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was very lonely as he was praying that priestly prayer. When he's on the cross, he told his Father, why'd you forsake me? Because the Father, spiritually speaking, turned his back on his Son because the sins of the world were placed upon him. But of course, the victory was up from the grave. He arose. By the way, we have, Trayvon, Wednesday night, the Passover at our church. We invite people to come. That's the Wednesday night before Easter. That's the 16th. The 17th is Maundy Thursday, where we darken the church. There's beautiful readings. There's story about the crucifixion. We leave quietly. There's a big cross being put outside of our church. On Friday, it'll be Good Friday service at noon. And we're going to go outside afterwards and put on that cross something that we want to write on a little note, nailing it to the cross. Then Sunday is the glorious resurrection on Easter Sunday, 10 o'clock. I can't wait.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Sounds great. So I think that Rob, you're going to maybe take us home here and give us a summary of some things that you think that each of us could do when we have those moments of loneliness. So once you share that with us.
If you're out there and you're feeling lonely, I would start thinking about what kind of steps, what kind of activity you can take to help deal with this. We bash the internet and things like that, but it could be a resource out there.
Mm-hmm.
And think about it. There's probably a lot of people out there who are lonely as well, and making some connections that way. But volunteering, schools have volunteers in hospital, getting off the couch, getting out, doing something, baby steps, and starting to make connections, pick up the phone and calling old friends, going out to lunch, get outside. There's groups of people who walk. They combine social and walking. I used to be a runner for years, and we'd go on these 20-mile runs, and that's how you deal with the agony of 20 miles.
You got me tired there, Rob.
In 90-degree weather, you're just chatting with your friends until you can't talk anymore because you're too exhausted. But in fact, when I ran and did triathlons, it was more of a social event for all of us than it was really a sport. It was a sport because it was serious, but still, it was a big social event. You know,
it's funny. I have a client, and she's going. You probably know this as a runner, but she does what's called the Camino, and they go up into like northern Spain, and they literally hike. And typically, they'll cover 13 to 15 miles each day, and it'll take her 30 days to do this thing. But she ends up in the south. There's different treks you can go on, but they typically end up in the southern part of Portugal. But to your point, she's met so many people from all over the world doing this, and she's like maybe 5'2", maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. But she just engages, and she lost her husband 4 years ago to cancer, and God bless her. She just made a point to be involved and to live. So
listening to all these walks and runs, I vote that the three of us take a 20-mile car ride somewhere and talk. And Ray, you come join us, all right? You tell us where to go.
But you have to take a risk.
Yeah.
A lot of it involves in a risk, and praying for strength. Get me off the couch. Pick up the phone. Call the grandchildren. Call
do
good old friends. It's
and maybe it starts with, a lot of times people will say, where do I begin? And I tell them, I say, just get a piece of paper and write down things that you like things you like to do. And so I would ask them, do you like play guitar? Yes or no? Do you like wine? No. Do I like football? Do you like baseball? But going through that process of this, asking yourself, in a perfect world, what would I like to be doing? And just start to focus on a couple things. Each of us do have interests that we have, but to pursue those things that you like. It's a lot more fun. Like I think you like running because you did it for a number of years, and so you're committed to it. Or join like a Bible study, for God's sake, or join a book club if you're not, the physical type. There are so many things you can do. Think about that.
But if you feel like it's just overwhelming you, and you're having panic attacks and other emotional problems, there may be a time you have to seek out a professional, a mental health professional of some kind. Just talk it over. And
sure.
In the matter of grief, I've learned through the years that sometimes grief is 6 months, sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's a lifetime. I remember speaking in a conference at Keswick Bible Conference in New Jersey, and a woman came over to me and introduced herself to me because her former husband and I knew each other. and he'd been gone years. And she said it's still really hard. And I think that's true, right, Rob? I mean, some people it just goes on and on.
Mm-hmm.
I think back to that story I told earlier about Rudy and that man they talked to on the airplane. It was almost like providentially, Rudy sat there with this man to talk to him, who was going through a tough time. He's traveling around, visiting places they always wanted to visit, but he's by himself. But that's terrific advice you're giving. It really is. And the
There's
grief,
people out there who know way more about this than I do. I'm kind of, it's just like basic orientation.
and the ones who know it well are the ones who've gone through it too.
Well,
they
there's grief groups. I mean, there's
Yeah.
hospice down
Mhm,
down the road
mhm,
from our church. They have grief groups,
Yeah.
and they have them for children. In
mhm.
fact, some of the grief counselors, when I worked in the schools, would come. A lot of school psychologists were trained in this kind of thing, but they have people who that's their specialty,
Mhm.
and they'd come into the school and do grief work with children who are really suffering.
Yeah, to those of you out there in the listening audience who do this kind of work, we thank you for it. We appreciate what you're doing. We appreciate your dedication to it. I know when hospice is needed, I know when people are really hurting, when you need a counselor, they become very important in life. You need a pastor, they become very, very important. What you said earlier, Rob, I think really rings a bell. The theme tonight is listen. Just learn to listen to people and kind of enter into what they're doing. That word empathy comes to mind.
We're so quick to give advice.
Yeah, we men are.
Just listen.
We want to fix things.
Fix
Yeah, I remember a man told me one time, his wife said to him, he said, look, I just want you to listen. I don't want you to fix anything. Don't tell me what to do. Just
Mhm.
listen to me.
Mhm,
And he said it was hard,
mhm, mhm.
but it's what you have to do sometimes. I want to say also the couple that's coming on, Traven, on the program, is that next Friday they're coming?
Yeah, it's a couple weeks out. Next Friday, I'm going to be out.
Well, that's right.
Yeah,
Next week we're doing a special
and then,
program. Yeah.
they're going to come on. We have a
2 weeks.
couple that has dealt with family members with addiction and also have lost a couple children. So I've asked them to speak to the topics that they would like to deal with, most comfortable with, and they're very open. But we're looking forward to have them on the program.
Yeah, that's going to be a
and
special
really get
program.
to get to know them and get to know their heart and let them share their heart with the
That's 2 weeks
audience.
from now.
yeah.
And next
a
week
couple
we have
weeks
our
out.
program already in the box. And
Yeah,
2 weeks.
correct.
We'll be
That's
doing
correct.
that. Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. Again, I'm going to remind you, dear friends, to come to the Passover service. It's at our church, April the 16th. Go from 6 to 8 o'clock. We have David Barker coming, who is an expert. He's out of South Africa. He's a Jewish gentleman sharing the program. We'll have the very special Thursday night program called the Program of Darkness in our church. And then Friday, we have Good Friday service at noon. And then Sunday morning, Easter service, the glorious Easter service with great music at our church, 10 o'clock on Easter Sunday morning. Rob, thank you for being on. You were a blessing to us tonight, really a blessing. You're
I tried my best.
yeah,
Thank
a
you.
special guy.
Yeah.
And you have a busy project, I know, at your house with remodeling, and I'm glad you
Mhm.
walked away from that tonight and
Yeah.
came over, spent the evening with us. That was terrific. And
My pleasure.
Traven, as always, it's a blessing, my dear
Yeah,
friend.
Thank you guys for it's been terrific. I'll just tell the folks out there on Easter Sunday, the choir will be doing 2 anthems. So you got
Oh,
a special
wonderful.
treat. So just come and
Wonderful.
see us.
Wonderful. God bless
Thanks,
you. Ray,
guys.
thank you for a great job leading us
Thanks,
tonight.
Ray.
Great evening. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to The Preacher's Kid and the Pastor, heard every Friday from 5 to 6 on WSTU Stewart.